All right, so I want to talk about that showdown that took place on Saturday night between Alabama and Texas, the All-State Crossbar Classic, if you will. I was there. The atmosphere was absolutely electric. I was so grateful to be in the stadium for that game in the press box. It was a very high octane matchup, and that's an experience that I'll reflect upon forever and be grateful that I was there. But I took a lot of time. Like when I was watching the game, I was formulating in my head, how am I going to dissect this game? How am I going to break this down? And there's one conclusion that I drew from that game. Texas very well could be the best team in the nation. And I'm going to explain why with a story. So I grew up a Patriots fan. I know I'm wearing a Dolphins shirt now. That can seem confusing, but I grew up a Patriots fan because of Tom Brady. And there was an intimidation factor when teams would go into Gillette Stadium because they were playing against Tom Brady and they knew what it was about. They knew that that team was about dominance. You'd see teams like the Steelers, the Chargers, the Bills, even the Colts with Peyton Manning and Andrew Luck go into Gillette Stadium. To teams who were beyond competent, phenomenal, would go into Gillette Stadium, and even though they're capable of being the Patriots, they would be intimidated, and fear would start to penetrate their minds, and that's how the Patriots would overtake them. But there was one team in particular that never went into Gillette Stadium having any fear, and the results showed because they played them boldly. And those were the Baltimore Ravens, led by Ray Lewis and Ed Reed. Every time that team went into Gillette Stadium, they were not afraid of or intimidated by the New England Patriots. And there were multiple times where they went into that stadium and did the ultimate. They took down the Patriots. And that's exactly what Texas did last night. Texas was the first team since LSU in 2019 to walk into Bryant-Denny Stadium having no fear, not being afraid of the Crimson Tide. And it showed. They took shots all night. They took calculated risks, and most of the time, those calculated risks worked out for them. And that's how they built momentum. They were not afraid. They were excited. They were embracing the competition. And from a fan standpoint, that's how the fans came into Tuscaloosa this weekend as well. They came in droves. Even though you're in Bryant-Denny, there was a big pocket in that stadium of burnt orange. And starting Friday afternoon and evening, I just saw Texas fans everywhere. And they weren't arrogant, they weren't rude, they weren't disrespectful, they were very classy people. But you could tell by their body language, or their countenance, that they were here. And they were here for one thing. They were here to win. Texas, same thing. That was their mentality. They were here for one thing. They were here to get that win. And it showed. The focus was there. The execution was there. Texas was loose. That's the thing. Texas was the more loose team on the field. Alabama felt very rigid at times on Saturday. Texas was the more loose team on the field last night. And they were not afraid to take chances. And those chances were how they separated themselves, especially late in the game. If you want to win, you have to be fearless. Because fear leads to mental mistakes. Mental mistakes leads to a loss of confidence, and a loss of confidence results in a loss. If you win, you're fearless, you're confident. When you're confident, you're clear-headed. When you're clear-headed, you're executing. When you're executing, you're winning. It's all a flowchart. It's all a flowchart. And Texas has mastered that. But also culturally as well. You could see this coming from a mile away. And I talked to many people about this summer, about Texas. Said this is an ascending program. And people, my own friends, mind you, laughed in my face. I said, and I would use that Josh Pate reference to defend myself. Just because it hasn't happened doesn't mean that it won't happen. Just because Texas has been a 7 and an 8 win team in past years, just because they're underwhelming for the past decade, does not mean that they're going to be again this year. Texas has done what they've had to do to construct that culture. And pair that with recruiting at a high level, and those factors combined together and fermented and fermented and fermented for years. Even though, last year with Texas was, as some people would call underwhelming, I thought was a building block. Even though they were, a playoff contender or a Big 12 championship contender late in the season, it was a building block that led to this year. Texas had been ascending, and you look at that team, and it is complete. That's what you look for in championship teams, is completeness, is depth. There was no hole with that team whatsoever last night. You look at teams like the Eagles who went to the Super Bowl last year. There's no hole. Solid line, solid receiving core, solid quarterback, solid cornerback, safeties, every position, even down to the kicker. Excellent. Texas on Saturday night, same thing. Offensive line. Quinn Ewers had no pressure at all, and I'm going to address that young man in a minute too. Quinn Ewers had no pressure. He could sit back there, pick apart that defense, and make sound decisions because there was no pressure. You didn't have to think on the fly. He could be relaxed, go through his progressions, and decide on which receiver to throw to. Defensive line got pressure on Jalen Milroe all night. Cornerbacks, great coverage. Receivers getting open all the time. There was not a unit on that Texas Longhorn team that disappointed on Saturday night. And that's what you look for in a championship team, is completeness. And, of course, I've got to see more of Georgia. I've got to see more of Michigan. But as of right now, Texas accomplished a feat that nobody has yet this season. Went into Bryant-Denny and got a win because they were a complete team. And Texas was confident going into that game because they knew that they had those abilities. They knew they were complete. They knew they could match Alabama toe-to-toe every play. So they went into that game last night with confidence. You look at performers, some of the best, whether it's Bruno Mars, Adam Levine. You look at Oprah with her talk show all those years. They deliver every time. Why? Because they know they're going to. They're confident. It's a mindset. And Texas went into that game last night with that mindset of we can and we will. And Quinn Ewers. And he was somebody that I thought about all summer when it comes to your conversation of quarterbacks to be drafted next year, 2024, April. He did some next level stuff on Saturday night, some things that he has some skills that are really going to translate to the next level. The most impressive being his awareness. There was one play, I believe it was Dallas Turner, turned the corner around the Texas offensive line and was coming straight for Quinn Ewers. And watching that play from the booth, I thought he was going to drill Quinn Ewers from the back, and it was going to be a fumble, and Alabama was going to recover. Like, you could just see this play playing out. But no. Quinn located, I believe it was A.D. Mitchell, right as Dallas was coming for him, and just released. He knew he was coming. He felt the footsteps. He felt the presence. He didn't panic. He just located an open receiver and delivered. That is next level NFL stuff right there. To be able to anticipate the way that he did. To be able to see the field the way they did last night. To be able to have the confidence to take shots and connect on those shots. But most importantly, that awareness. You have a quarterback like that. Not only is Texas going places this year, not only can somebody like Quinn Ewers guide Texas to incredible heights this year, but somebody like Quinn Ewers can build his resume to potentially become a first-round draft pick this year. That's another thing people have laughed at me for. But I saw a report this summer. Quinn Ewers really impressed NFL scouts. And they were starting to think of him as a second, maybe even first-round pick. And if he continues to play the way that he did on Saturday, that story, that narrative, is only going to continue to develop. Another thing I want to delve into in this video, in our sport, is the importance of timing. Saturday was all about timing. Texas is back. Texas is here. But it has taken a while to get there. There's been a lot of trial. There's been a lot of tribulation. But Texas is here, and they're here to stay. They're not going anywhere because they had done their homework with recruiting. They had gone through those losses as a team. Last year, the Alabama game, the TCU game, they've gone through those games that build character, that help your team craft and curate an identity. They've done that. And like I said in the last video, 74% returning production. It's Steve Sarkisian's third year, so there is clear vision and there's comfortability, there's familiarity when it comes to Texas. That's why they won this game. Alabama is in a more experimental stage right now. They're finding what works after losing guys like Bryce Young, Will Anderson, and Jahmyr Gibbs. They're trying to see what works. There's a lot of talented guys in that locker room. Just know that. But you have to put guys in the best positions to win games. Alabama's trying to define exactly what that is. They're trying to craft that vision. Texas has vision because they had been crafting it for these past several years. Alabama does not because they're in a process, they're in a stage right now where they're resetting. It's all about experimenting right now, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't. When you lose a lot of production, especially very talented guys that were leaders in the locker room to the draft, you have to go back to square one. And that can be challenging to do in just an off season. So it's expected that Alabama doesn't have a clear vision. That's not on Alabama. That's just life. That's just a situation that people, organizations find themselves in. Sometimes things happen. Sometimes you lose things. But you have to pick up the pieces and find a way forward. And Alabama has the guys in the locker room to do that. It's just how do you put guys in the best positions to succeed? What is the vision moving forward? How do we execute that? How do we set it into motion? That's the process that Alabama is going through right now, and that's what Texas has gone through in these past years. So Texas is just further along in their schedule than Alabama. It's all timing. So this win ultimately for Texas on Saturday, it was predictable. I didn't predict it because I had this epiphany. I had this feeling that Alabama was going to win last week. But am I surprised that Texas won? No, because they're just more developed. They are further along on their timeline, so to speak, than Alabama is. They have that vision because they've been curating it these past several years, and Alabama right now doesn't. But that's to be expected, given their situation. I'd take a moment to appreciate Texas's culture. It's built on swagger, it's cutting edge, it's aggressive offensively, and they're not afraid to take chances to set themselves ahead, to give themselves a competitive advantage. I'm reading a book right now by Jimmy Johnson. It's about swagger. One of the best head coaches of all time. That's what he infused into all of his teams. And every championship team I've seen, whether it's Alabama, whether it's LSU, whether it's Georgia, whether it's Florida State, there was always a sense of swagger. It's not arrogance, but it's swagger. That mentality of, I'm better than you, I'm confident, and I'm going to showcase that. Texas has that right now, and they walk with that confidence. And that's what Steve Sarkisian has injected into that program, and it shows. And I just want to say that I'm here to appreciate it. And because they have that foundation now, and they have the vision, they have the personnel to execute it, Texas, don't kid yourself, is not only a national championship contender, but they could very well be the best team in the nation right now. And we may not know it. We may not be aware of that right now, but I think there's a possibility that they could be the best team in the nation as of right now. Now, Alabama. Let's not hit the panic button just yet. Yes, it was that the loss felt different than losses in past years because Texas essentially took the wind out of Alabama's sails at home, and we hadn't seen that done in a while. Texas came in with no fear, and they managed the tempo of the game for the majority of it. And that's something that we just hadn't seen take place in Bryant-Denny Stadium for years. So, yes, it's weird, and for Alabama fans, it's something to process, but it's not something to overreact to. The remainder of Alabama's schedule, it's manageable. It's challenging, but it's manageable. There's game. I can see Alabama winning out, but I can also see them winning two. I can also see them losing 2 or 3 more games. It all depends on how they respond to this, how they respond to adversity. That's what defines a team's character. You have a game in 2 weeks against Ole Miss, a team whose composition is something that has frazzled Alabama these past 2 years. It's an explosive offense. Alabama has struggled to defend against explosive offenses. They did on Saturday. They play Ole Miss in 2 weeks. That could very well be the reality again. And if it is, then college football playoff may not exactly be in the cards for Alabama this year. But if they can adjust, if they can discover ways to prevent explosive plays against explosive offenses like Texas and Ole Miss, Alabama could still be formidable down the stretch here. But you look at the SEC West. There's a lot of teams like Alabama who don't really have a vision, don't really know their identity yet, don't really know who they are. Like LSU, like Texas A&M. Both those teams have opened up with, alarming, eye-opening losses to start the year in either week 1 or week 2. So there's a lot of teams in the West that are in the same position as Alabama. If Alabama can win the SEC West and go to Atlanta and play against Georgia, they legitimately have a shot, and there may be light at the end of the tunnel. But adjustments have to be made, and this game has to be used to find identity for Alabama. It felt like that Ole Miss game back in 2015, where Alabama looked kind of miscombobulated, but maybe through that game did they find something? Did they find an identity? Did they find something that worked? There was a drive, it was late third quarter, early fourth quarter, where things started to click for Jalen Milroe. Maybe they build off of that. That's what remains to be seen. All I'm saying is don't sell all of your Alabama stock just yet, because there's a lot of high character guys in that locker room, and through them you can find an identity, you can learn from that loss, and maybe continue to craft that vision down the line. Maybe Alabama finds a vision. I'll tell you what doesn't work, though, and it's that theory, that approach of murder ball. I'm an avid fan of 80s rock. I love it. Van Halen, Guns N' Roses, Bon Jovi. I love it. If I were to be a musician, which I'm most certainly not, but if I were to be a magician, I would love nothing more but to be dressed up like Axl Rose with the leather jacket on, the leather pants, the spikes on top, the long poofy hair. I'd live for that. Go up on the stage, perform Sweet Child of Mine. That would be beautiful. There's just one caveat, though. There's just one issue. It's 2023. And that music would not exactly resonate with the young consumers, the young listeners of music in the world. Just because it's something that I like doesn't mean that it's something that will be effective when it comes to consumers that listen to music. Just because I like it doesn't mean that others will. Same goes for murder ball, an offense and defense that's predicated on physicality and the run game. That won championships back in the 2000s. You saw it in the NFL, you saw it in college football. Teams with those identities won championships when I was growing up. They no longer do. You've got to embrace the long ball. You got to have an aerial attack. You got to be able to make explosive plays and have defenses fear you. Murder ball is something that, I appreciate it. Like, I love physicality. I love the run game. I love, jamming it down teams' throats and laying down big hits, having a suffocating defense and building off of that. I love it. I do have an appreciation for those low-scoring games. But in 2023, that's just not going to work. Just because it's something that we like does not mean it's something that's going to be effective now, if that makes sense. Moral of the story, I know this was a long-winded video. I had a lot to say. But to conclude, don't panic on Alabama, but a pivot has to be made. Texas is back. They're definitively back. They're not going anywhere. And yes, I personally do think that they are the number one team in the nation because they look like right now the most complete team in the nation, and they went into an intense environment that I was a part of, took the wind out of Alabama's sails, and dominated, especially in the fourth quarter. And that's something that's a very challenging feat. Teams that can do that, teams that are complete, and teams that have a definitive vision. That's the composition that you need. Those are the traits that you need to win a championship. Texas reminds me of Clemson back in 2015 when they played Notre Dame on that one rainy night. And Notre Dame was a team that was expected to be very formidable, very promising that year. Clemson, from the bell, dominated. And that win served as a foundation of their confidence. And that took them to the national championship. Even though they lost to Alabama, that took them to the national championship. A win like Texas had over Alabama, that can be a foundation for their confidence moving forward. Something that they didn't have before. But now Texas has that. And they can build off of it. And that is what's scary for the rest of the nation, for the rest of college football. And that is why I think Texas is the best team in college football. And they can very realistically win the national championship this year. Have a great day. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really appreciate you and the time that you took out of your day to watch the video. And if you enjoyed it, please be sure to like the video and share it, as well as subscribe to The Era. The more likes and subscribers I get on this channel, the more resources I can attain, and the more resources I can attain, the more value I can provide to you, the viewer. And that is how I show my appreciation for you for the time that you devote to watching my videos. So thank you so much, and have a great day.